Same problem number 4 on the chapter 4 test. And I'm going to start by putting it into standard form. 2x squared, that's a 6x, minus 6x plus 5 is equal to 0. And I'm going to solve it by completing the square. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my constant, and I'm going to move it over to the other side. So I have 2x squared minus 6x is equal to negative 5. Now, in order to complete the square, I have to have a coefficient of 1 for x squared. So I need to divide both sides by 2. So that's going to give me x squared minus 3x is equal to negative 5 halves. And if I'm going to complete the square, I'm going to go plus blank, plus blank. Well, completing the square means I start with b over 2 squared. And I do that off to the side so I don't mess up the flow of my overall calculations. So b is negative 3 over 2 squared. That's equal to 9/4. So I'm going to add 9/4 to both sides. Now I have enough to complete. Now I have a perfect square trinomial on this side. And that means I'm going to have something that's going to look like that. I'm going to have I want it to turn it into a binomial squared. And I know since I had a coefficient of 1 for my x squared, there's going to be an x, and it's going to be x plus or minus something. I don't know what it's going to be. But it's always the number here that you used to get the 9/4. So that's going to be x minus 3 halves. Because we know when we FOIL this out, the last term is going to be negative 3 halves, negative 3 halves. That's going to be the 9/4 that we got when we completed the square. That's the whole purpose of completing the square, is to make that easy. It's always going to be your b over 2. So that is equal to, well, let's call this negative 10/4 plus 9/4. So this is equal to negative 1/4. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Square root here, square root here. As soon as you put a square root sign, put in your plus or minus so you don't forget it. Just make that part of the habit when you have a square root. So this is going to be x minus 3 halves, because the square root of something squared is just what's underneath the square root sign, is equal to the square root of negative 1/4, which is the same thing as the square root of negative 1 over the square root of 4, which is the same thing as I over 2. So what happens when I add? Well, see, I made my own mistake here. It was plus or minus. Plus or minus, plus or minus. See? Happens to the best of us. I'm going to add 3 halves to both sides. I'm going to have x is equal to 3 halves plus or minus I over 2, the same answer that we had when we solved it using the quadratic formula.